It's time for the show that covers all things people, power, and politics from the Motor City to the Beltway. This is The Pulse. I'm Root Barrage. We're glad you're making Metro Detroit's only nightly political talk show a part of your routine. And we're going to keep bringing you that unbiased political news as we move into a new year and a new administration. And a potential face in that new administration has many of you talking. President-elect Trump's pick for Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. You know, he's expressed doubt about vaccines, even pushing a theory that scientists debunked, claiming they cause autism, while his opponent needs to be confirmed by the Senate. But it's got some health experts worried about the changes that could come. One of them, the head of the Wayne County Department of Health, Dr. Abdul Al-Sayed. Take a listen.
About him is that his analysis of the problems is usually pretty spot on. It's when he gets to the solutions to the problems where sometimes you have to scratch your head. And the reason why is because a lot of times his approach is not science-based. And in science gets to the answer over time, but there's a lot of feeling that goes into that process, and some of the papers get it wrong, some of them get it right. You have a consensus that emerges, but you can always cherry pick some of those papers out there and say, hey, there's evidence for my position, but are you not analyzing the scientific evidence to actually ask what the evidence is showing, or are you cherry picking to justify some preconceived notions? And so having a guy like this at Secretary of Health and Human Services, overseeing agencies as important as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Food and Drug Administration, the National Institutes of Health, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, he's going to have the ability to start setting directions for these agencies that is less than evidence-based. And we all hear about his approach on vaccines, and those are really concerning. But also, when you start talking about the idea that Red 40, which, by the way, I'm fine if folks want to ban that, fine. But to say that that's the reason we have a diabetes epidemic is just not based in the science.
So the people at Fago are watching that really carefully with their Red 40, but a lot of people are watching this. But when he says, look, bottom line, my job is to end chronic disease, clean up corruption, and give data to Americans so they can make informed decisions. Those three, you would say, just from, again, a big level, yes. But when we look at things like banning food additives, that you mentioned, food dyes, chemicals, getting ultra-processed foods out of these school lunches. Nothing wrong with that, right?
No. So this is the thing, right? Some of these answers, they're things that people across the political spectrum have been pointing to and saying, we really ought to do that for a really long time. And if this moment is going to bring those conversations to the fore, I welcome it. But I want to have the conversation in an evidence and data-driven way. And I want to do that in a way that informs an approach to keeping people safe across the board, rather than what seems to feel like a vibes-based health policy.
But when you look at the nutrition department, they're part of the Food and Drug Administration. They're in charge of all the labels. And one of the big complaints he has is that these labels just aren't accurate. They're not telling the whole story. And he believes that they're just not doing their jobs. Is that accurate?
So I think that they do the job that they're supposed to do, but when I'm looking at what I'm going to put in my body, I'm a lot more interested in how processed that food is. And to that point, I think we tend to bury all of the additives that get put into ultra-processed foods down in the ingredients where people are less likely to read them. So if the information that you're focused on is the degree to which food is processed, yeah, we're missing the mark. But we've required them to tell us how many calories, how much of that is in carbohydrates or proteins or fats. And so those would all be really good things to do. But on the other side of it, I want to have a broader conversation about why it is that people tend to eat ultra-processed foods in the first place. We tell people, why don't you eat more salad? Well, if you go to Meijer or Kroger or wherever today and you want to buy a bag of spinach, that bag of spinach is going to cost you $2.50. Yeah. It's going to have about 50 calories in it. You buy 2 of them, that's $5, right? And now you're talking about, what, 100 calories? And so a lot of times people who are pressed by the money they have in their pockets are saying, well, look, I got to feed my family, and I'm not going to do it on bags of spinach. And so there's a much bigger conversation that needs to be had about the choices that people are making that is not just driven by the idea that somehow everybody has the means of making the best possible choice.
I want to talk about, we have just a quick minute left here, fluoride. He's saying we just got to remove it from the water altogether. Your take as a doctor?
Yeah, you have clean, healthy teeth that don't have cavities? Me too. And a big reason why is because we grew up in households where fluoride was just in the water. The evidence about fluoride has been pretty clear. And right now you've got folks who are trying to cherry pick data to say, well, we should be rethinking that. But again, a number of lower income communities, a lot of the oral health is provided right there in the water. And that's what we've been doing by public health consensus for a very long time for good reason.
Half of the research budget, he says, should go to holistic, integrative, and alternative medicine. Good idea?
I wouldn't be talking about half. I would say, yes, take half of what is now, and then let's also be investing in things like, I don't know, emergent infectious diseases, because we've got H5N1 breathing down our necks. And so there's a lot we can do. And on that point, raw milk, probably a bad idea. Like, we didn't have raw turkey over Thanksgiving, right?
Sure.
There's a reason we don't drink raw milk either.
And he's suggesting right now that things like raw milk and some other things like peptides and other things should be reintroduced into the food chain here. You know, it's interesting. I should mention before we wrap this segment up that he's made it very clear, RFK Jr. has, that he believes that if you want a vaccine for your child, you should be able to get one. Although he has very, very strong feelings about them, and that's something that we should point out.
And I do want to say that part of the challenge is that when you start raising questions as Secretary of Health and Human Services, a lot of folks are going to think twice about something that's been saving lives now for decades.
As you know, there are many sides to every story. Not everybody agrees with those concerns. We also spoke with integrative cardiologist Dr. Joel Kahn, who agrees with many of RFK Jr.'s ideas. Traditional doctors kind of look at RFK and say, whoa, what are you doing? Slow your roll. What do you think about his take on, let's say, fluoride? He says, let's knock fluoride out the water. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, what's happened over the last 30, 40 years in countries that put fluoride in the water, of which Grand Rapids, Michigan was the first city in the United States to do it, the rate of dental cavities went down. What happened to the countries that didn't put fluoride in the water the last 35, 40 years? The rate of dental cavities went down. They've gone down in all countries, whether they fluoridated their water or not. But fluorine in the water can cause problems. There's good science in children. If their mother's drinking heavily fluorinated water, children being born from that mother may have issues. There's a problem with your teeth called fluorosis if you're drinking heavy fluorinated water, or if the mother does for a child.
But do you think fluoride is good for teeth?
I think it's perfectly fine if you brush with it. There's no reason to put it systemically. It gets taken up in our bones, and it actually displaces calcium, the good guy in our bones. It weakens our bones. We don't need fluoride in our water. The group that's going to suffer is the low-income people. They may not have access to the same dental care and the same dental education, but if we can break through that and let them get fluoride toothpaste and some good dental hygiene education, we don't need it in the water.
Let's talk about his take on vaccines. And so many people are concerned that he is kind of pushing the idea that vaccines just aren't safe. Yet at the same time, he says if you want your kids to get vaccines, or if you want to get vaccines, I believe you should be able to. Yeah. There's some confusion in terms of what this could end up doing. Or do you think people should be wary about not getting vaccinated?
Well, since 1986, the vaccine manufacturers have gotten a complete pass over all other pharmaceuticals. They don't have to do double-blind randomized studies. You know, when I was a kid, I took my vaccines, and I got maybe 4 or 8 or 10. My grandkids now are going to get 72 if they stick to schedule. And none of those have been studied the way the drugs that I write in my clinic nowadays get studied. None of them. There is no MMR vaccine versus placebo study, or any other vaccine, Gardasil versus placebo study. We need to bring good science back before we start injecting infants with untested vaccines.
Even President-elect Trump, in his interview with Kristen Welker on NBC News, said, hey, I'm all for vaccines if they do a good job. He said, I'm glad that polio vaccine was around. If that was something that I support that. He didn't give an absolute about RFK and what he would think about his policies, but even Trump himself, who has hired this guy, is saying some vaccines are okay. Is there a middle ground here?
Yeah, I think there is a middle ground. We've gone crazy with the childhood vaccine schedule, and we've now introduced, you know, regular and very early COVID vaccine requirements, and they're going to keep kids out of schools. There's going to be mandates. That all has to be thought through with a real panel of experts that looks at the issue. Even Marty McCary, who's going to be hopefully the new head of the FDA, is quite a vaccine expert. From the beginning, he was asking the question, why do people with immunity need vaccines? I mean, you know, many of us got COVID very early, yet to keep our job, we were forced with a situation of deciding on treatments that weren't really fully studied long term. You know, the Pfizer studies were a few months only. This needs to be discussed openly and be examined like every other pharmaceutical agent.
Let me ask you this, though. Do you think when you look at RFK and how he appears, how he has talked, the way he has come across this stuff, that he's gotten a fair shake or an unfair shake at addressing these problems?
He's gotten a completely unfair shake. He's brilliant. I mean, he's been studying this for over 30 years. He wrote a book called The Real Anthony Fauci that sold over 1 million copies. If it was full of errors, he would have been sued left and right. There hasn't been one single comment that he made a mistake in the book, The Real Anthony Fauci, something everybody should read, from the HIV to the COVID era. So he's right on target.
When he talks about taking half the money out of the budget and putting it into holistic and integrative world, you obviously, as someone who's an integrative guy, would believe that that's a good thing. But does that rob some of the traditional programs of the money that it needs?
Well, it's going to have to be a transition. We got a $5 trillion health budget in the United States. 80% of it, $4 trillion, is on what we call chronic diseases that could be prevented. We know that heart disease, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune diseases can be prevented, but we have no program in medical school, nursing school, in doctors' offices to really educate and institute programs. And yes, we absolutely have to layer in prevention to cut back on, for every ill, there's a pill. We can't keep treating these diseases. We're living shorter in America than we were 10 years ago. It's not working. We're spending more, we're living shorter, we're sicker, and the only one winning is the pharmaceutical industry and the hospital industry.
Whether you like it or not, you're going to get all the sides of a good conversation on this show, and that's what we do each and every night. Those full conversations are on our website, fox2detroit.com. But up next, we're looking ahead to the new year. Macomb County Executive Mark Hackel takes a look back at 2024 and tells us his goals for 2025. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. All right, back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics from the D to D.C., and, of course, Macomb County. Joining us to talk about the year that was and goals for 2024, Macomb County Executive Mark Hackel. It's always good to see you, Mark. Thanks for joining us.
Roop, always a pleasure being on your show.
You know, it's funny. I was reflecting on how long I've known you, and when I first got here in 2009, you were the sheriff of Oakland County, and I was a new reporter here. And you always welcomed me to Macomb County with open arms, and I quickly realized that that's just not Mark Hackel. That's the culture of Macomb County. There is something special about the way people welcome others in Macomb, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and when you remind me about being the sheriff, and it brings a tear to my eyes. I say that because it's a job I absolutely adored and loved working with the media on that, because it was our way of getting the message across of the things that we're doing so people felt comfortable about it. But I do believe that is the culture of Macomb County. We're very welcoming, engaging, and you know, pretty much very honest people, and open to discussion and willing to answer the questions that people want to hear about. So.
You know, I remember when I moved from New Orleans. I'm from Troy, but I moved from New Orleans back to Metro Detroit, and I remember the one place that my wife and I felt most was like New Orleans was Macomb County, because people like community, they love their family, and they like to have a wonderful time. And that's something folks in Macomb County know how to do well. I do want to ask you a little bit. We're going to start with like some serious stuff and get into some fun stuff about goals for 2025. That investigation to that Clinton Township explosion that happened, some of the biggest news in Macomb County. Where do things stand with that right now?
You know, first, credit to the obviously the response that came from Clinton Township Police and Fire and even emergency management. You know, to some extent, the county was engaged with that too. But Bob Cannon did a great job as a supervisor getting out there and calming the storm, getting people to realize, okay, we're on this, we're trying to figure out how do we deal with it. It was very tragic. You know, obviously a life was lost as a result of that. And you had firefighters that were in harm's way in the midst of all that. So again, where they're at right now with it is obviously they're still filtering through the legal issues, both civilly and criminally. And there is charges that are being brought about with the person that actually owned the facility. And that's in the hands, obviously, of the prosecutor and Clinton Township Police Department right now.
The people of Macomb County and Clinton Township, they want to see this adjudicated the right way, and you're confident that that's what's happening?
No question about it. I mean, I think you're always going to find, you know, once this case starts moving forward, they get all the evidence and the information, you're going to see an outcome that, you know, is going to be, I always say this, it's on behalf of the system itself, make a determination, is somebody going to be held responsible if and when we find out they were the ones that actually committed a crime.
I want to talk a little bit about you. I know that as a public servant who's been doing what you've done for so many years, you're good at figuring out a way not to answer this question, but I'm going to ask you the question a million ways. Are you at all interested, even a little bit, in running for governor come 2025? I'm going to ask you politely, Are you even slightly interested, yes or no?
Well, you know, I'll dissect the question itself, kind of bifurcate it. Would I be interested in the job? Absolutely. Do I think I could, you know, manage the state as we've done with the Sheriff's Department and even as a county? I think we've done some great things and some great things have happened. The challenge is going to be running for the office, and so that's a completely different mindset. You know, doing the job and understanding the responsibilities of it and putting a great team together. I'm confident I could do that. The question is, how do you get through the politics of it? Because there's so many things to do, whether it's the fundraising and making sure you're out there asking for endorsements, and you know, that takes a political machine to make that happen. And also there's the partisan nature of it, getting through a primary. You know, I'm one of those people that are very fortunate when it comes to a general election. I get cross-section support, you know, whether it's Republicans and Democrats, I get that support, and even the independents. And I am very much a kind of conservative Democrat. And so the question is, would you make it through a primary knowing that you got to lean more to the left to convince people that, you know, you're the Democratic candidate? And I don't know that I could do that. I think I'm much more independent-minded, and that would be the, I guess, the task at hand then.
And now you talk about independence. The last person to throw his name in the ring, the first person, was Mayor Mike Duggan. If you ran as an independent as well, that would be a really tough matchup, wouldn't it? Even just by nature of two independents.
Yeah, I think so too. And again, I think I'm kind of a natural fit for that title as an independent. You know, Mike has been very supportive, and he's been very much involved in the Democratic Party, but he's done some great things with the city of Detroit. So, and I think you're finding that people are interested in both parties right now, saying, you know what, we're tired of this this fighting on both sides. And I've always said it. We got to get rid of the R's and D's, the blue and the red. We got to start figuring out, you know, let's not talk about reaching across the aisle. Let's talk about getting in the aisle to solve the problems before a primary. And then obviously even during the general, but then after, once people get elected and they get into office, let's no longer talk about that, you know, that designation you have next to your name. It's a responsibility that people have given you to get the job done.
You know, when you look at what President-elect Donald Trump is talking about relative to cabinet picks and some of the lofty ideas he has, it's changing a lot of government from the federal level. How are you looking at that, and how do you believe that will affect you at the county level? Are you weary of anything, or are you looking closely at something in particular?
You know, it's interesting. I work closer with our federal delegates that numbers responsibilities of, you know, whether it's a Gary Peters, Stabenow, you know, and Alyssa Slotkin now. So I have great relationships with those folks, even Lisa McLean and John James. So in the county, I tend to look at these people to help us figure out what do we need to do, whether it's a Selfridge issue, defense industry, you know, lifting up our manufacturing base, all those issues. I tend to talk to these people. When we talk to them on a regular basis, you know, there's very little access I've had directly with presidents in the past. And so with that being said, it's those that we elect as our representatives, you know, statewide, and especially those that come from the county, that I'll continue to work with. And we've had great partnerships with them to lift up those various areas I just got through talking about in Macomb County.
There's some of those programs that some people are saying could be compromised. People are afraid about cuts in funding to certain things. As a county executive, you look closely at the money that's coming from the feds through some of those Congress people, but also through the president.
Yeah, and we'll have those conversations with our Congress people to figure out, okay, is this really going to happen? You know, right now it's too early on. A lot of conversation people are saying, you know, it's like, again, going through that last election, you don't know who to believe or what to believe anymore, and it's all of a sudden sometimes they want to just put fear into people and get them all riled up. And so my job has always been, even as a sheriff, to calm things down, try to figure out how do we understand what really is happening, and then address the issue as it's kind of presented to us. So I'm fortunate, got great relationships with all of our federal counterparts, and with that being said, it's not about the partisan aspect in Macomb County. It's about the partnerships to make things happen.
And this show isn't about just the fiery soundbite, but it's about those smart conversations. And I think everyone's looking forward to a more smoother political discourse moving forward to see how things affect us. Last question in about 30 seconds. Big goals for 2025 for the county.
I think moving forward to try to get our legislatures to come up with some kind of sustainable funding for roads. I mean, the state did it for state roads, and now we need to figure out what are we doing for local roads. So we're going to continue to work with our legislators to find a solution to make sure that it's sustainable funding, so we have more money to fix those roads and bridges everybody talks about. As I always say, there isn't a road or bridge we can't fix if we fix the funding. And the other one, mental health issues. I mean, we always talk about it, and you hear a lot of public officials talk about it. Macomb County, we're doing something about it. Our new central intake and assessment center at the jail has got national attention already, and we haven't even broke ground because we're now going to address the issues when people come in contact with law enforcement to find out if there's a better way of handling them than just incarcerating them.
We talk about Washington, but Lansing needs to get out of its own way to start working together a little bit better to do some of those things. But Mark Hackel, County Executive of Macomb County, always good to see you. Thanks for joining us here.
You too, Rip. Thanks.
On the Pulse. While TikTok is on the clock, the countdown is on for its owners to sell or face a ban in the U.S. We're talking with a social media expert about what that would mean. That's next on the Pulse. And welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show. Thanks for staying up late with us on The Pulse. Well, TikTok for TikTok, the owners of the wildly popular social media platform, facing a January deadline to sell or face a ban in the U.S. over national security concerns. Social media expert Ethan Lloyd joins us to talk about what this all could mean. People some background as to what could happen in the next month, between now and January 19th, if something doesn't change with TikTok.
Yes, just to add context to everybody who may not know, TikTok is owned by a parent company that is from China. Because of that, Congress has come to a decision that they would like it to be owned by an American company, and that went all the way through. And now they have very few days left to sell, honestly, to a American company, and they need to find an American buyer. That needs to be put there as well in a very short amount of time. And if not, the app stores will begin to get fined for keeping TikTok on the app marketplace.
Let's talk about the danger that TikTok poses, according to the U.S. government, which is that China and Russia and so many other countries that we're not exactly chummy with want to use data, which is, by the way, like gold. It's a commodity, right? And they want to use data to find ways to kind of screw with the United States of America, and they use everyday people. Shouldn't people be concerned that TikTok, owned by a Chinese company, could be doing that?
There is a level of concern there. What we have to understand is we live in an attention economy. You know, where your eyeball goes on the screen is monetized. There are ads all throughout TikTok. There is data that is shared. What you do, your scrolling history, that shows your behavior, and that behavior is used to make marketing decisions. And I guess what a lot of people in Congress feel is, do we want to be marketed to by Russia, China? And you remember we heard about Russia paying influencers to spread messaging. We hear about this kind of influence all the time. I think they're trying to mitigate that. I think they're trying to correct the wrong that they've seen on other social media platforms like Facebook. They're essentially trying to get their hands on things and making sure that everything is American-owned.
Well, in an American company, to your point, I mean, the fact that Meta is out in California, it's an American company, but somehow Russians were able to get a hold of the data and then try to manipulate the election results, is what they're accused of. So if that can happen with an American company, just selling ByteDance to an American company won't necessarily solve that problem, right?
No, it won't necessarily solve it, but I think they feel as if this is a step in the right direction. I think they feel a lot less comfortable that it's owned by a Chinese company. And the other thing I really want to highlight is billions of people have scrolled on TikTok. There is a lot of user engagement on that platform. As far as I'm concerned, it's the best social media app out there. And the fact that it's Chinese owned and it is influencing consumer decisions in America, political decisions in America. We saw how much each presidential candidate utilized it. I don't think that we like that China is behind this whole push, you know?
But I mean, when you look at so much of what China owns, when they own your influence and they own your influencers, that can be concerning.
It can be concerning, especially for Congress. I think that particularly, this is something that happened when this first got introduced, the possibility of a ban. As soon as you opened your TikTok app, if you lived in America, they sent out a message to everybody before you even, got to swiping, and it said to call your local senator and congressman about why they should not ban TikTok. And then there was a button so that you could call them directly and share the number, and it called their office. And this, I don't think, was a positive. I think what ended up happening is it made everybody more nervous, and it just put fuel in the fire. More people wanted the ban after that.
So do you think more people are dropping off TikTok in America because of the fears? Or do you think that hasn't affected the average
No, I think
user?
More people are getting on TikTok because of the scarcity that's coming from this. We don't know what's going to happen in the next few days. We don't know if they will, sell to an American company or not. The other thing is you have to find somebody who wants to buy it. We don't talk about that enough. But I think that more people are trying to enjoy it while it's here. Because like I said, it is the best social media platform out right now. There is no algorithm like it. The content that you see is so tailored to your interests that they have captured so much of our data.
All right, a lot going on. That is the Pulse for tonight.